We have another extra special guest with us this morning, and his name is Mark Levine. He's a cranial sacral therapist, and he's going to tell us all about cranial sacral therapy. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You've actually been a guest on the show before.
It was wonderful.
So we're going to share with the viewers, once again, what it is you do, and maybe you can start off by telling them what cranial sacral therapy is.
Cranial sacral therapy is a very light touch form of body work, which devolves from osteopathy and has a long history in the traditional forms of body work. It uses very, very light touch, about 5 grams of pressure. And it's something that we would think we couldn't move something with 5 grams of pressure, but it's very much like if you're trying to stretch silly putty with as little pressure as possible. It takes a long time, but it does stretch. Yeah.
Good analogy. And I think so often in life we think harder is better.
Yes.
And that we don't realize that we can do more with less oftentimes.
Absolutely.
And cranial sacral is a perfect example.
Yeah.
And to break that down, cranial sacral, cranium and sacral being lower back or sacrum?
Well, yeah, the cranium is the skull, and the sacrum is the triangular shaped bone at the bottom of the spine. And those are the two zones in the body where the central nervous system, our brain and spinal cord, are actually tethered to our bones. Our brain and spinal cord, other than those two areas, floats.
Really?
With no connections. So when we bend forward, for example, our nerve roots in our spine are free to move. There's no bony connection to them. And so the purpose of doing craniosacral therapy, it's named for that, in part because the part of our body that relaxes us, what are called the motor nerves of our central nervous system that relaxes us, come out at the back of the head, or where the head and neck meet, and the sacrum. And by focusing on those two areas, it's possible to go into a very deep state of relaxation, which is the beginning of the process of craniosacral therapy.
And I immediately relate to this because I think of where a person might hold tension. And I know for me, if I feel tense, it's in the upper part of my neck or the lower part of my skull, or in my lower back. And do you find that typical with a lot of people? Yeah,
it's actually a hardwired set of reflexes. I would say it's universal. I mean, we all have areas in our body that would, over a long period of time, tend towards breakdown. So somebody, one individual might hold more tension, for example, in restricted breathing, and over a period of time they might have respiratory distress, or they might feel it as cardiac problems, or they might feel it as digestive problems. But in the immediate situation of a fight or flight reaction, which is something that somebody would experience when they're shocked or feel fear, the reflex is universal, and that is tightening all the muscles on the floor of the pelvis, tightening the jaw muscles, right? Those are the two areas that are most immediately activated with adrenaline.
Yes, yes, and with a person over time, I suppose that builds up, and without having the skills to release it, stress management skills,
absolutely,
that can be compounded and add up over time. So in a sense, cranial sacral is, and we're going to discuss what it's really useful for in bigger situations, but also as a preventative.
Oh, yes. A lot of people come to see me just for wellness. Majority of my practice is for treatment of specific concerns, but people can discover a lot about themselves with craniosacral therapy, because it does take us down to a place of self-awareness. Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I can attest to that because I have had experiences with you, and it's really beyond words. And I noticed that this is the Upledger Institute because it was John Upledger who originally founded this work.
Yeah, well, he was the person who validated this work. This work was originally came into being with an osteopath named William Gardner Sutherland back in 1901 or 1902. It was an osteopath from Kirksville, Missouri. And in the United States, it's important to know, in Canada, we don't have the same system of osteopathy that they do in the States. In the States, osteopaths are medical doctors who are also trained in this form of body work. And the tradition comes from Sutherland's initial work, where he recreate head injuries. So he would have, it was like a football helmet, the old style leather football helmets with a series of pressure points that he could use screws on and create points on his head that he would squeeze over a course of days. And he would write down all of his physical symptoms. His wife would write down all of his emotional symptoms, and he would and then he would figure out ways to relieve those pressures.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it was really from personal experience.
Yeah, it was for him. And then after this, it had a great deal of currency through the 20s and 30s and 40s. It kind of fell into a bit of a quagmire over in the latter part of the 20th century, until John Upledger, who was an osteopath, came along, and he decided that he wanted to take what was considered in osteopathic circles to be a kind of woo-woo and unresearched area of practice. And he did, at Michigan State University, he headed up a team of researchers in the Department of Biomechanics, and using a lot of fairly sophisticated technology, and had good funding for this, did a lot of research to validate the premises of craniosacral therapy, which are kind of surprising to a Western audience.
Okay, so he did all the proof, the scientific research,
Yes.
and background that way.
Yeah.
Well, interesting, because I knew there was a correlation with the Upledger Institute, and they have a website, and I'm sure looking up on the internet, there's
Yes.
lots about craniosacral, so our viewers, our audience can research further. But I thought, even when I read that, it doesn't give such a concrete explanation to what craniosacral is, yet it's doing so much for so many people.
Yes.
So it's such a powerful form of work, but it's almost that the experience is the best
Yes,
description.
that's right. I've been practicing for 15 years, and I still find it a challenge to say what it is didactically, because somebody said it's kind of like chocolate. You have to experience it. If somebody says it's a substance that has sugar and it's brown,
But once you try it, then you know.
Then you understand.
So how did you get